Okay. So thank you again for coming to Above the Fold, How Women Make Literally the News. I'm Jennifer Davis, and I work here at the library. Actually, can everyone hear me okay? I can actually probably take this off. Is that better? Okay, so we only have 3 microphones, so it's more important that you hear them than it is that you hear me. So I actually used to work at the Journal Star with these ladies and with many of you in the audience. So I was so thrilled when I reached out and said, for Women's History Month, would you be willing to do a program? And they all were very excited. And I'm excited to hear stories. It's amazing how you can work with someone for years. And I bet I'm going to hear stories that I didn't know. So the reason this kind of came to my mind is we have, the library has been doing a lot with news literacy, which is so important. All you have to do is pay attention to what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, the propaganda, the disinformation. So when Women's History came up, I thought it would be great to do this program and also pick their brains a little bit about how they feel we have moved forward in journalism. So hopefully you guys will have some questions, but I'm going to get started with the questions after I introduce our speakers. You probably don't need me to do this because you've seen their bylines for years. Many of them you know personally, but I reached out and said, please send me a little bio. Well, Pam Adams here, she is totally still a reporter because this is what she sent me. Pam Adams is a retired Journal Star reporter. She wrote features, a column, and covered healthcare and education. That's it. And despite me asking for more, that's all I got. Okay? She self-edited. Okay, so Terry did a better job, I think. Okay? So Terry Bibo is a freelance author who took a 35-year detour to journalism at the Peoria Journal Star. The oldest of 6 children, she grew up at the McClure Branch Library, one of my favorites, where she would check out the maximum 10 books a day in an attempt to top the charts for summer reading. She is an award-winning reporter, columnist, and editor, covering everything from 100-year-old ladies to film reviews to the greater Peoria Sanitary District. Her favorite part of the job was sitting in the back row at city council meetings and laughing at the mayors. Since leaving the Journal Star, she has taught journalism at Bradley University, publicized efforts to rebuild Washington after its tornadoes, helped with several book projects, and written a column for the Community Word. She has been working on a series of mysteries for about 10 years, but volunteer projects seem to suck up most of her time. Her goal is to live the Hobbit-like life of Bibo Baggins, garden, cook, tidy, and write. She lives in Elmwood with her husband, Bill Knight, which writes us. There are 2 cats and a Labrador Retriever. Whenever possible, they visit their son's family in Chicago and look forward to brunching there without masks. Thank you, Terry, for joining us. And I'm sure we're going to tease more out of Pam as time goes on. I also loved Barb's bio. Barb Drake began her newspaper career in Dubuque, Iowa at age 7 when she published her first newspaper, distributing it throughout the neighborhood with a staff of friends. Her newspaper career ended and she retired in 2005. In between, she interviewed a young Barack Obama, saying she'd give him 20 minutes of her precious time. Pretty sure this was before he was president. Engaged Bill Clinton in conversation at the White House about the long caterpillar strike. Nearly got tossed out of Betty Friedan's apartment during an interview. Can't wait to hear more about that. And did her best to report stories and write editorials she hoped would make the community she loved, Peoria, a better place to live. In her senior year at Woodruff High School, Barb called the Journal Star to request an application for a newspaper career scholarship. She learned she met the first qualifications, grades, need, desire to be a journalist, but she was missing the fourth, a penis. She was told women did not have newspaper careers. Fortunately, she was not told that at Bradley University. They gave her a full scholarship, told her she would have a fine newspaper career, and was happy to have her serve as editor of the student newspaper. Immediately after graduation in 1967, she went to work at the Journal Star, where she enjoyed a 40-year career. Her reporting beats included education, civil rights, and in this time of desegregation, they often converged. She was a reporter and assistant city editor before moving to the editorial page in 1986. She stayed there until her retirement 19 years later, and as many of you know, the newspaper's editorials were judged the state's best 11 of the 14 years she led the department. She's proud of the editorial crusade she led to the development of the Peoria Riverfront Museum, Heartland Community Clinic, and their editorials helped save city bus service, develop the riverfront, and extend the Rock Island Trail. For several years, she served on the executive board of the National Conference of Editorial Writers and is a deputy editor of its magazine. And in full circle, she helped interview and select Journal Star newspaper career scholarship recipients. Not bad for someone who wasn't supposed to be a journalist. We're lucky to have all these women here today. And for those of you who just joined us, just so you know, we are recording this. We hope to have this on our YouTube channel. So when I reached out, I told them that I wanted to talk about their lives because this is Women's History Month. And for much of history, men and women have lived in different spheres. And some would say we still do. Men ran the world, many would say they still do. And women took care of the home and family, and often still do, except for now we do get to do that and work a full-time job, which is good. And it's not that there were no women in journalism in the 18th and 19th centuries, but it was extremely rare. And women reporters were more often relegated to the society pages, home pages, features, soft news. So to start off, I hope I'd like each of you to speak to what made you decide to be a journalist and what was it like for you, your personal experience breaking into that male-dominated field. And I have to apologize, I should have turned this on. So you can start, Terry.
First thing I thought when she said this, are we on?
Should be on. It's
red. That means it's on. Network? No. Good, not him.
this one. You can tell I don't do these programs very often. Hello? Hello? That one works? Okay. Barb,
Would you repeat the question?
oh. What made you decide to get into journalism? And what's your experience been in a male-dominated field?
I think you got a little bit of what made me decide. I just always loved to write, and I probably did that better than most other things. Briefly, at one point in my life, I wanted to become a dress designer, but then it became apparent that I was incompetent at that. So I always loved to write and worked high school newspaper, college newspaper. My experience getting into a male-dominated field, talked about that a little bit when I was told that, you know, women didn't have newspaper careers and I couldn't get a scholarship. But I also, and I should speak about this, I had a wonderful, wonderful high school English teacher who told me I could do whatever I wanted to, I would be successful. I had a couple of wonderful Bradley professors who said the same kind of thing. And when I got to the Journal Star, there were two women, much older, who had come to work there during World War II. And because they were single, they were allowed to stay on. There were other women in the society, cooking and fashion, and I wanted no part of that. I wanted news. So I was just the second woman hired since World War II to work in news. And that sounds really difficult, but it wasn't. I was treated very well. I had wonderful bosses, and I rose fairly quickly, and I really give a lot of credit to my bosses who told me that I was a good reporter and I was a good news person. And I didn't feel working there for them any sense of discrimination, except that I was not allowed to cover police news. And actually, I was pretty happy about that.
You were there before me.
Well, I don't even know how, is it working? Okay. Somehow or other, I have always known I wanted to be a reporter and my hometown newspaper. Now, I kind of took a circuitous route though, because at some point after high school, I was really just sick of school and I hadn't planned on going to college until I realized that college was about the only thing I was prepared to do, was go to more school. So I did, and I went to Monmouth College and then I came back, went to ICC and then to Bradley. I have to tell you this time, during this time, I had also worked on some community papers based on the South Side. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do this was, I came from a family where I think we had 2 or 3 newspapers coming to the house. And I never felt like they reflected what I knew when I read the story. So I kind of wanted to do that. Now, even so, I ended up at Bradley. And by the time, and once again, I just got sick of school. I said, I can't take this. And I was going in to tell my advisor that I was going to quit. And he goes, oh, Pam, good to see you. You only need 12 hours. I said, okay, I'll stay. And at the same time, they said that the Journal Star was looking for a Black student from Peoria to intern. Well, there weren't that many Blacks in the journalism department, no more than, I'll say between 4 or 6, and I happened to be the only one from here. So they did all this thing. They assured me that that wasn't the reason they were wanting me, you know how that goes. But, and so that's how my career began. I've never really thought about being a woman in a male-dominated world. But it always felt like the best way I can compare this, I was in middle school band. And I played the flute. The trumpet sat behind me. And middle school boys, they just want to play louder and faster. And that's it. Now, not everybody, but that's how I felt in general about men in journalism. They just want to play louder. And that's not the kind of journalism I want to be anyway. So, I didn't really feel bad about it. it was very different being the only Black in the newsroom for some years. That was an adjustment, just a real adjustment. Even though I felt like I had grown up in a very integrated world. And I still to this day can't really explain it to you, but it was very different for a
So
long time.
when Bradley was looking, so Bradley told you that the Journal Star was looking. So from there on, that started your career as a journalist. So you
I started out part-time.
Okay.
I collected, I went to the courthouse, picking up bank records. And then, I came on full time, time to graduate, I talked to Tom Driscoll. Said, "You want to stay?" So, yeah, and I started out working general assignment and they kind of threw me in the water my first night there. Sent me to a store. I have no idea what I'm doing. But yeah, so that was the beginning.
Did everyone, while I had to step out, did you all?
Yes.
Terry? Okay. So Terry? Okay.
I'm just a couple of years behind Pam. So in the way these things work, the reason I became a journalist is because I got a scholarship that wouldn't let Barb go. You know, as the oldest of six, we were scrambling for money, and my father more or less said, "We'll look at this scholarship." And signed me up for it, and I asked Tom Driscoll several years later, I said, "I always thought you guys messed up the paperwork, and I wasn't really the one you wanted." And he said, "Oh no, we picked it and get out."
Yeah.
But I did it in part, the reason I became a journalist was not my plan. Always the plan was to be a writer, but I had the additional thrill of irritating my father big time. Because Dad was on the city council, he was a business person, and if there was anything he hated, it was the journalists calling him up and getting everything wrong and screwing it all up and driving him nuts. So when I went to University of Iowa, I didn't really participate in that. I did newspapers in grade school. I to this day have trouble with negative numbers because I was working on the paper the week they did negative numbers and missed that whole section. But I worked in the high school paper. But in college, I worked summers and a couple of Christmases at the Journal Star. And as Pam said, it's difficult to explain. But I found my people, my weird misfit people that don't fit in anywhere else. The smartest people, the loudest people, the most profane people. I would say the only thing I would have come out of 40 whatever years of working in a male-dominated field was I swear like a sailor. And it's hard to realize that probably a caterpillar that didn't fly. So, but in the newsroom, you were supposed to ask questions. You were supposed to be curious. You were supposed to be bugging people and trying to not accept everything right as it was handed to you. Only place I can think of that's really valued. And it is a continuing grief to me that our field has devalued to the point where that's not really a viable option for many people. But anyway, I also did not feel particularly discriminated against. Oddly, probably the only time that I was given crap for being a woman was from our first female managing editor. And I don't even remember what it was. Oh, yes, I do remember what it was. I came back from vacation and found out that Ted Newberg, I was relegated to the women's department at one time and was always trying to get serious issues in there. So I had like some, I don't know, 80-part series on rape that I thought we should run something. And he left out like part 4. I came back from vacation and I was so mad. And he's like, "Well, we'll just run it now." And I'm like, "You can't run it 3 weeks later and say we left it out." I'm so mad. I started crying. And Marge Fanning came after me. She said, "You know, every man in that newsroom knows you're in here crying. You can't do that." But in any event, that was the only time I can remember that I was ever, pointed out as a female in a direct way.
So I said something that reminded me that maybe I'll be real quick. One of the things I love about being a journalist, and one of the things that I still carry with me today is a great sense of curiosity. I call myself Curious Barb, and I love asking questions. I love learning something today that I didn't know yesterday. And that was, I had great opportunities to do that at the Journal Star. And I still love that, still try that. Taking classes at Bradley and doing all sorts of things with that in mind.
I feel exactly the same way, which is why I'm happy to be at the library now. It was a good segue. I agree with you. And I think everyone in this room is probably saddened the way the newspaper industry, the struggles facing the newspaper industry. And many of us in this room, former journalists, have found new avenues, and that ongoing sense of curiosity probably played a role in that. But so I was happy to hear that you really haven't had experiences of being where you internalized feeling discriminated against too much, except for Barb when she started. Theo Jean Kenyon recently, a longtime reporter at the Journal Star, recently passed. And
She was one of the World War II hires.
yes, she started in 1944, stayed at the Journal Star for 66 years, probably would have stayed longer. Maybe you guys can answer that. But I'm curious, I know you all knew her, and Terry did a very nice piece on Theo in the Community Word recently. Could she ever share any of her stories as far as what it was like for her to break into journalism as in that time as a woman?
Not much, no, I don't recall that she did. The only thing I recall is that she was not real happy about me being up there and as an editor and able to correct her copy. She felt that she should have been doing that I should not be in that position, and she should have been doing that, and it was a discrimination against her.
It is too bad you took crap for that, because, I think it was, what's his face? He used to say, Theo should have been the editor. Theo was like 5'8" Catholic, and she ran their paper. She didn't talk about it much. She was just tougher than nails. It was really hard to get through that, and she hated anyone who edited her stuff. Don't feel bad. That wasn't discrimination. That was at her funeral. That was. I had not heard the story before, but Phil Bibo came, and he was talking about how when he was fairly young at that point. Everybody was young at one point. When Theo was older. She was 99 when she died, and I think she had no intention of going then either. But Theo said when he had started, he worked in the sports department, and Theo was a fairly tall woman, and just out of curiosity, he asked her, "So, did you play basketball?" And he said, she turned around and looked at him and said, "No, did you play miniature golf?"
Theo was tough as nails, and she stayed there. I remember when first starting at the Journal Star, I was afraid of her. Yeah, what? Everybody was,
including most of them.
and I never had the guts to ask her this, but I had heard that she would have stayed longer if she could have necessarily at the paper. So I think that you all and Theo.
Oh, wait a minute, I have to tell you.
Yeah.
I was never afraid of Theo. There was that side of her that could be, a devoted friend, and she took care of many people, I think. But, they're not lying when they say she intimidated a lot of people. And I also always suspected that she had to develop that persona as a woman in journalism.
She also had this amazing sweetness, which a lot of people will find hard to believe. But she loved Snoopy, she loved and cartoons, and she took care of everybody and everything around her. She just, you know, she was a wonderful person. I shouldn't just talk about it.
Well, what would have the makeup of the newsroom been when she started? And then to kind of backtrack, what was the makeup of the newsroom when you were in the newsroom? Like, were you among just a handful of women? Were there very, you know? You may not know for Theo what the makeup of the newsroom was.
The makeup of the newsroom when Theo started was indeed World War II, and most men were off to war. And so I couldn't give you exact numbers, but I can tell you, at the Journal Star, a large number of women were hired to work in the newsroom. And this happened everywhere around the country. It happened to Betty Friedan. She was hired to work in the newspaper. And then when the men came home from war, she was fired.
Well, and it all depended too on what the job was.
But it was Theo and Bernadine Martin were there.
Yeah.
They were
there.
Bernie and Bernie covered sports for years, which.
But the obit writers were always women up until recent years. In fact, that's how I got hired. Was they hired 6 people at the same time. I was the only woman. I was the obit writer.
You know who we're leaving out, who I think would probably have more of a story in this, probably experienced more than any of us. And that's Jane Miller, who worked in sports for many years. You know.
What's the other her name? She used to go with the ball.
But she was.
Fazana, Nancy Fazana. Because, yeah, in sports that.
Yeah, that, yeah.
So what was the makeup of the newsroom when all of you started?
Well, I started in 1967, and as I've already said, there were 2. I was only the second woman in the newsroom, except for the 2 that went back to 1945, or back to the World War II, I should mean. So there were 4 women, and I couldn't tell you how many men. There were no male editors. There were no male copy editors. I mean, no female, I should have said, editors, no female copy editors. So it was very, very sexist. But, you know, that would change. That would change.
I came in shortly after a new younger crew that had more, that included more women. I can't remember the numbers, so, but it, maybe a year after, like Rhonda Rothballer and Joan Richardson got in. There were, you know, quite a few. Wasn't all of them like Barb. Yeah.
So you've all had the opportunity over your careers to interview very famous and infamous people. So of course, some of the stories we have here are some of your favorites. Barb, you've already mentioned, name drop Betty Friedan, so we're gonna have to hear about that. But yeah, tell us some of your favorite interviews or most interesting interviews. You know, we want to kind of time travel with you today. I don't care who starts. You want to start with Betty Friedan?
I can do that. You may have heard this. This is at some point it was in the late 90s. The Journal Star decided that it wanted to interview famous Peorians who had gone on and done something important in the world, and we wanted it. And WTVP cooperated with us. Maybe you've seen some of the programs. So we wanted a record, you know, of this. And so I was sent out to interview Betty Friedan at her Washington, D.C. condo. I had been warned ahead of time that she could be very difficult, and I had better make sure that I knew all sorts of things about her, and that I had read every book that she had written, because otherwise, if I didn't know something, I would be thrown out. So I did all that, and I did so much research. And so we got there, we flew in, she was flying in from New York and her plane was late. So it was me and a couple members of a television crew. And back then, a guy I hired to hold a tape recorder. And so I started, I got about halfway through the first question and her phone rang. And I looked at her for guidance and I seen nothing. I continued asking her the question. And then all of a sudden she stood up and screamed and she said, "Get my phone, get my phone." And one of the cameramen ran to get the phone. But of course, by then it was too late. And so she stood up, so she screamed, "I said, get my phone. If you don't have the courtesy to get my phone, I don't have the courtesy to talk to you. This interview is over." So now imagine, there are 3 of us who have been flown out to DC to interview her. And it's been promoted on TV and in the newspaper. And I have got to figure out something to do to save the interview. So I'm thinking, what can I say? And I kind of went on the basis of what I had read about her, knowing that she succumbed to flattery, let me just say that. And so I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you wanted us to get your phone." I said, "What you were saying was so interesting. I didn't want to interrupt you." And so I said, "Would you please just finish answering that first question? I want to hear what you have to say." And so she did, and she went on and on and on, and she finally sat down and continued with the interview. And the 1 hour that she had promised became 2 hours. So, and she only got mad at me one other time when I thought that maybe I would be thrown out. But, so it was really interesting. One of the things that I was surprised to hear, because I had read the opposite, was that she had a soft spot in her heart for Peoria. And she thought that things that she had learned here and had enabled her career, that she would not have learned had she grown up in New York City, where she lived at that time. And so that really surprised me. And I also was surprised to learn that she still had friends in Peoria. She came back and talked to them from time to time because she wanted to hear how Peorians thought about the issues she was dealing with. She didn't think that she could, she thought Peoria was more representative of the nation than New York City, where she lived. Is that what anything else you wanted to know?
Well, and I don't know if somebody else wants to take a turn, but you've all had so many people, interesting people that you've interviewed. So, Pam, you want to jump in and?
Yeah, I've got a story similar to Barb's that I'll tell you, but two things. I forgot to tell you about the newspaper scholarship. My sister got the newspaper scholarship and didn't go into journalism. So I feel like I kind of filled in for her. The things that really stick with me weren't so much famous or infamous people. It was that chance to be curious and talk to these really interesting people who leave you with life lessons. One of them, and this guy would be, I can't even think of his name, but he would be famous in science circles. He had won every major scientific prize, including the Nobel Prize in Science. And he was down at U of I, and he had helped develop whatever they used to develop, so that became MRI. And we were talking, we've been talking quite a while when I realized, I said, all you've talked about are your failures. And he says, well, failures, that's the essence of science. And it hit me, it's like, oh, that's right, that's the essence of life, and I always, I bet you that interview was 30 years ago, and it's never left me. Another one like that was a man, this was a series, believe it or not. This is the other thing I like about journalism. You was a series on family. One part was gonna be financing them, one part was gonna be the food, one part was gonna be the whole thing. But I was talking to this one man, huge, and their family reunion was like a 3-day conference, a huge affair with banquets and workshops and all kinds of things. But this one particular put up all of the money, you know, and it's like, and he kind of relied on people to, you know, have other family members, and we're talking about at least about 300 people. And he relied on, you know, other people to pay their dues, and if they didn't pay their dues, he lost his money. I said, well, don't you resent that? And he just goes, if somebody didn't do more than their share, nothing would get done. I said, oh, yeah. That is, once again, and those are two things that stick with me. The story similar to Barb's has to do with, you know, Peoria has always talked so much about it in Peoria, all that kind of stuff. So being curious as we are, it's like, okay, what happened to them? You know, where are they? That turned into our feature story. A photographer and I traveled down to Miami, Oklahoma, where we found the last of the Peoria Indians. All along the route, you see evidence of, you get to Kansas or Missouri somewhere, and there's a Peoria street. You know, there's all these little clues of places they stopped on their way. But anyway, we're in Miami, at their tribal center, talking to the Chief Lewis Myers. The photographer immediately goes in and starts taking pictures, which really upset the chief, that he thought was very disrespectful. So before we could even get an interview, we were getting kicked out. You know, I didn't get this. And so I said, I can't go back to work with no story, and the story has to include an interview with the chief. And so I got, you know, he just made himself unavailable, and I go and try to knock and track him down wherever I heard he might be. He would not see us. He would not see us. And then Eric and I went to the we go sit in the hotel room. What are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? Finally, I tracked him down, you know, and I said, look, you know, but I'm not with Eric. And so we've got to, you know, you've got to talk to us. And at this point, I'm desperate, I'm begging. And he wants to release about how this, how what the fact that doesn't make him feel. I'm going, yes. And he's going, well, you know, and you understand because you know what's happened. Yes, yes, yes. And you know, going on, and it's like, I understand, you know. And once again, kind of appealed to his sense of, I understand, you know, and that this is where I probably went a little too far. I said yes, and my great-grandmother was part Native American. Wasn't my great-grandmother, it was my half-sister's great-grandmother. But we finally got the interview and got that. But I had that same feeling, you know, getting kicked off the reservation. The only other thing similar to that is, and a lot of the reports you know this, about my encounter with Bill Cosby, where he,
I don't know this story. I see a lot lot of shaky pens.
Okay. And this was long before the current estimates, but I was not happy with Bill Cosby for a speech he did that's called the pound cake speech. And in it, I thought, it's kind of, it was famous. But I thought he was being very derogatory to poor people and poor Black people. And I wrote a column about it. And in this column, I said, oh, Bill Cosby can go to hell. Well, I'm on the phone talking to somebody, I'm doing an interview or something, and I hear somebody constantly trying to call me, but I'm thinking, I'm interviewing, so I'll make it leave a message. Finally, the news assistant in our department goes, hey, Bill Cosby is trying to get you on the line. How is, what's he want? I hang up, pick up the phone, and it's just there to lay me out about what I had written. Not just to lay me out, but to explain to me why I was wrong and was going to have this researcher send me all of this information. And he's going on and on and on. And finally, it became, I said, how much time does he have? And I just want to see. And it was kind of like talking, everybody has that crazy old uncle that you don't argue with them, just let them have their say. And I felt like, how long is he going to go on? And I bet you he went on a couple hours. He just would not.
Wow.
Yeah.
The opposite of Betty Friedan.
So that's it. Those are some of my stories.
So were you taking notes the whole time you were writing?
Yes. After I stopped, but then he put his daughter on the phone,
What did you write?
I wrote a follow-up about that conversation. Yeah. But, which was hard
Because it was 2 hours long. We ran out. Yeah. So Jerry,
She made a joke. My son wants to FaceTime with the baby. Oops. Hey, hi Alice, but we're in the middle of something. Bye. Hey, your grandparents.
Yeah.
Normally I would have just ditched y'all.
she almost ditched us, she said, because the weather's so nice.
That's right. I got a lot of sticks out in the garden. Priorities. But, there used to be a thing where people would have these t-shirts and it would say, golfers do it for all stuff. And I always thought, and I think I've seen a couple that said, journalists have the best stories. And it's true, because that's our life, that's what we do. So there are interviews and there are stories, and every interview is kind of a relationship, however brief it might last, with that other person, where you're getting in their head and you're letting them at least so far into your head, hopefully not too far, because you're supposed to keep that journalistic distance. But it is, it's a fascinating dynamic. There's a rhythm to it. The three of us all worked on what the Friedan piece was part of our, what we call the legacy project. And one of the things Pam left out was she interviewed C.T. Vivian for that. Huge. A ball, and a lovely fellow. I got to interview a couple of different people for that. And just to kind of show you the range of how things can go. I also was in New York and I interviewed Dick Stalin, who was the fellow who got his Zapruder tape when he worked for Life magazine after the Kennedy assassination, and told all of it. He loved to tell stories too, because a whole life in journalism, those are these people. Let me tell you, because they have story after story after story. But at that point, it was in 1999, and they flew us to New York. We had a crew. He was on top of the Time Life building, editing a piece for the end of the millennium. And it was so different from what we're dealing with now. in terms of the resources and the time and the availability to tell the story of some deaths.
Yes.
So that opportunity doesn't really exist anymore. But that wasn't really the first thing that came to mind when you were saying, I mean, that was like, this is way cool. It was a wonderful thing to be able to do that. But the other wonderful thing, and we are all natives here, is the telling the stories, the little stories too, in our area. And the people who make up the fabric of the community. That's part of what's missing now. Fabric is wholly or threadbare. But the first story that came to mind was a 100-year-old lady that I interviewed when I was in the women's department. Show you the range. Who did not want to be interviewed, okay? So I guess that's the common thread. But we did 100-year-old ladies, and the people in her nursing home wanted her to be interviewed, and her family wanted her to be interviewed. So they're all out there, they bring her out in a wheelchair, and they're like, this nice lady's here from the newspaper, and she wants to talk about your life. And I'm like, so she's not saying anything, and it's really hard. You can make a story out of almost anything. You've got to say something. So she's just sitting here like this, and I'm trying to throw out a softball question because you want to sometimes that'll get people going. Just once you start, I'm like, so Hazel, is it 100 years? That's a long time. Can you tell me about your life? And Hazel looks up and she says, I am kaput. She drops her head. I'm like, going, Hazel, don't you want to have something to say in the newspaper? What do you want to say? What is the whole total of your life? Hazel's like, I am kaput. She does it about 3 times. And so, as I recall, that was the shortest 100-year-old lady story that I've ever heard. She never really did say anything more than that, and I didn't fill it in with all of her references.
I was like, you're gonna say she died.
That was the story.
I wanted to mention a couple of others. You're talking local. I have been a reporter for less than 6 months, maybe 5 months, when I was assigned to interview John Goodwin, who was the local NAACP president and quite a well-known figure. And that's quite a lot to ask of somebody who's been a reporter for 5 months. But he was really good and really gracious to me. And he told me about 10 years that he had voice lessons and that he had traveled throughout the U.S. And he had captured a national quartet trophy 3 times. Now this is a guy that's hitting up, the whole new civil rights activities in Peoria. And I knew nothing about this, but it really broadened my understanding of and appreciation for the man. He said, and by then he was working for the post office. He worked through the night and then at the post office all night. And then he worked throughout much of the day for the NAACP. And I was so pleased to be able to tell his story. And he said that he had hope for a society where the color of your skin was not a measuring stick. But he was awfully good to me. He was awfully kind to me. I went on and covered him for years after that. Oh yeah, he talked about his sister, how he got really interested in civil rights and the color of your skin because his sister, weren't the same parents, looked white. And he would walk her home from school. She was a couple years younger. And that he would get harassed. What are you doing with that little white girl? So anyway, it was, I was told, my boss told me that I needed to learn everything about him, including how many fillings he had in his teeth. Well, I never asked him that, but I did learn a lot about him, and I really appreciated him. Another great local person I interviewed was Nancy Goodwin Brinker, founder of the Race for a Cure. And she had just been appointed the U.S. ambassador to Hungary. And I picked up and I had written about it because I think it was the New York Times, I'm not sure. that had written something very critical of her appointment. You know, this society woman, this big friend of the First Lady, shouldn't be going to Hungary, shouldn't be, you know, doing that kind of thing. And so I had written I'd written an editorial saying, yes, this woman has lots of qualifications. Don't demean her. Look what she started. Look how many lives she has saved by the research she's funded on breast cancer. And so I picked up my phone a day or two later, and it was Nancy Goodwin thanking me for the editorial and talking to me and inviting me to go over to Hungary and interview her. This was another whole world in newspapers where my editor said, yes, of course. You know, right. Go ahead and go. Anyway. And so I was able to interview her at her residence in the embassy. And one of the things and we talked about her work, but one of the things I came away was that this was not really a glamour job. I mean, yes, she had to meet all kinds of fancy people and be, you know, well dressed, but she was up at 5 a.m. and she was going to bed at 11 or 12. And she they were so concerned about her safety that she could not go out. And you know how you might go out and buy a couch and say, oh, I like that style, but I want it in blue, not in red, and you know, and the same kind of thing. So she could not do that. She had to take it literally that day right off the phone because they were afraid that somebody might plant a bomb in. And I also learned that she loved to, she insisted on daily exercise, a half hour of running, but she could not go out and just do that. She had to have a tank go in front of her and a tank go behind her. It totally changed my view of what an ambassador's job consisted of. It was not glamorous as far as I was concerned. And I came away with greater respect for her. And she has remained, we've remained somewhat in contact over the years. When my daughter-in-law developed breast cancer, I contacted Nancy to thank her again on a personal basis for what she had done to save women. And she got back to me and called me and wanted to know how my daughter-in-law was doing. So these are good Peorians, right? These are really good Peorians out there. If you want me to later on, if there's time, I can talk about interviewing President Clinton and President Obama.
Well, the fact that you're had the time to do these interviews and these stories,
Exactly.
it is so different from
Yes.
the way journalism, especially our local journalism, is done right now. I mean, when you were saying that, oh, they sent you to Hungary, yeah. Even when I was at the paper, I don't think that would have happened. I mean, things had started to change. It became more profit driven. You know, we've gone from also just needing a pencil and a notebook. And really, I mean, you did need a pencil because at a certain point, if you're outside the temperature, your pen stops working. But now you have to tweet, video, blog your stories and get it all up on the web before you actually start writing the physical story. There's no time to do anything and no time to follow up with people. So what do you've seen this change? I mean, some of you left before it got really bad. What do you think about? I'd like to hear your perspective on how things have changed and what you think that means for our community going forward. I know where you're going to go with that, Barb. I think a lot of us feel the same way. Can you speak to it?
I think it's very scary. I think that that reporting served as a check and balance on local governments. It's also good reporting. It's also a way for people to decide who they want to vote for in upcoming elections. I mean, I think it's very difficult now. It's very difficult for me to know who to vote for. And so I think that's, you know, that is very scary. One of the things that's also, I think you're not going to see, I am really proud of the editorial campaigns that we did at the Journal Star that pushed, as was mentioned, the establishment of the Peoria Riverfront Museum. I am not bragging when I say that it would not exist but for the editorial campaign. And the editorial campaign we did to establish a health clinic here to serve the poor, desperately needed. And now it is the biggest health provider in metropolitan Peoria. Talking about interviews that we did, I had a wonderful, another favorite interview of mine consists of, this was prompted by a friend I met just walking across the street who said, hey, do you think that the bus referendum is going to pass? This was a referendum to save the transit district, and it didn't pass. We were not going to have bus service here anymore. I said, you know, I don't know. It's going to be very close. And she said, I talk to a lot of people who don't know anybody who rides the bus. And I got to thinking later, So a couple days later, I hopped on a bus at 6 in the morning and stayed on it until, I'm going to say, 6 at night. And I talked to everybody I could who was on that bus and said, why do you ride a bus? And a lot of them had minimum wage or near minimum wage jobs, and they didn't have the money to have a car. A lot of them were too young to drive, and they didn't have anybody to take them to school. A lot of them were disabled and couldn't drive. Why? Handicapped in other ways, and desperately needed a bus ride. So that getting back to your question, those kinds of things aren't happening now. And I think it's very scary. I think interesting. And I don't know what the answer is. And the other thing that's very, very scary about all of this is how all of the disinformation is coming in. You know, people do not get information from trained professionals who have checked things out and done research.
Pam or Terry, do you want to? Anything?
I think I go along with a lot of what Barb said, but the other side of this is, I think change is coming, change is here, and we are all in mourning about it. But on the flip side, you know, during the good old days when money was flowing, you know, I don't think we as media professionals took a strong enough critique of ourselves. So there was a lot we weren't doing great in the first place. And we need to consider that as part of all of this too. With the videos and social media and all of that, or just the internet. On the one hand, I love the fact, or I used to love the fact before everybody had a paywall, but I love the fact that if something was happening in Seattle that I was curious about, I had access to the Seattle paper. I love the fact, we've all talked about some of our favorite interviews, and I think we can all say that there are people that I've left that I just wanted to say, look, just go talk to Mary Smith. You'll have a ball, you'll love her. And video, it gives you that opportunity. So I was terrible at it, can't see, can't do it, can't hold the camera. So on the one hand, there are some good aspects, I think, about this opening up. I mean, I've seen some really good pieces done where they incorporate all of it. But somebody committed the staff and made the investment to do it all. I'm hoping now that we are just in the midst of change, that somehow we're going to figure out how to do this, because no matter how people get it, people still want information. We just may be getting most of it in different ways, you know. So I'm holding out hope that this younger generation is gonna come up with some way to save us from the bean counters, that the bean counters will destroy themselves, and something else will rise out of the ashes.
And save us from the non-professionals.
The professionals are.
Well, but here's the thing, Barb, I've seen, sometimes I feel like the professionals are mourning the fact that they don't get to curate. You know, and sometimes we, sometimes they're curating one on that radio. So that was, and sometimes I've seen non-professionals do, quote unquote, non-professionals do great jobs. I want to leave open that possibility too. So, I'm of a big, I know a lot of people feel like we do, but I'm more mixed on that. So, yeah, and I hope, yeah.
I'm somewhere in between these guys. And the journal was a cash cow, okay? And that money doesn't always get poured back into the community. They made a 34% profit margin. That was outrageous, the amount of money they made. When back in the day, they weren't just sending people, what was it, Tom, they sent to Vietnam for a year to learn when he first became a editorial writer. But they had a yacht with a staff of a crew of 3 down at the Ivy Club. We had a helicopter where the what do you call it, office was, the marketing people. Yeah, you only ran out every once in a while to take pictures,
I miss those days. I wasn't there for those days.
Well, there was the helicopter pilot had an affair with one of Henry's wives. Even though, but it wasn't perfect, even then, at the same time, there were guys in the sports department that would get paid off for the bowling league with a case of whiskey every Christmas. So we had our downsides. So like I said, Pam's, there's stuff in between. And on the positive side of what's happening right now, there has never been a better time to get information. Pam alluded to being able to follow something in Seattle. You can get information from all over the world, and at the top level, journalism is better than it has ever been because of all these tools that are available. If you want to find out information about breast cancer or anything else, you can just get on the internet and read the study for yourself. So if you have any kind of background, but there is too much information. And when you take out those filters and the people who are able to sort the poison maybe from the real nuggets of gold, to make all my metaphors all up, people are overwhelmed. It's not that they don't have information, it's that they don't have good information, and it's very hard to tell from one end to the other. And after Jenny asked us to do this, I thought, I'm just going to come and bum everybody up because I don't see good ways around this right now. The avenues this is heading in, the news streams, we are in the midst of a huge change. And I'm so sad that the way we did things isn't the way it's going to be in the future. So there's a little loss of control there. But what I do see right now is there are going to be 2 levels of information, just like there are 2 levels of everything else. It's the middle that's getting hollowed out. It's the local people who aren't there. You can get on Facebook and find out all kinds of things. You better be careful about it. You can find out the high level. But finding out, I know more about what's going on in New York, but I know about what's going on in Peoria right now. Even though, and one of our wonderful local government observers, Connie, stand up, please. This is trying to hold the gap by going to some of these meetings and putting stuff in the community word and on the League of Women Voters website for things that aren't getting covered. Okay. But to me, the biggest serious thing is the lack of information to make good decisions, but also the way these things are going. If it's not going to be us, the League of Women Voters, it's not going to be that. It's going to be vested interests, and that wall that we had before, where we we get independent trained journalists, those people don't exist. You want to write a press release, you want to have a point of view, you want to get paid by a corporation, you'll get out there. The independent viewpoint, that I don't see where it's coming from, other than stand-up folks.
Right, no watchdogs. No, I mean, when I covered City Hall, I went to, you know, planning and zoning faithfully, all these meetings that were covered, that no one's covering now. Like you said, at the local level, we have very few journalists who are acting as gatekeepers locally.
And so many of these, you've mentioned sources on the internet. A lot of them I just don't trust. You know, they have their own perspective, and you see that happening in national politics, and you see that, you know, we're separating into separate worlds of beliefs. It's hard to get people nationally to even come together. But that's what scares me. I don't trust a lot of what I read on the internet. I'm not as adapted to it as the two of you are.
Why? and this is true, you raise a good point. I think we are all, you know, there's too much information, and it's hard to be able to decipher through it. But, you know, I still make the point, I have to remind us that we couldn't always trust everything we read in the mainstream media. I mean, you know, love
The odds were better.
Huh?
The odds were better.
Love the New York Times, but I'm thinking about that war they have drafted. But yeah, so we know. So.
Well, and what was it, 15 years ago, I think it was Barack Obama who said, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts.
Right.
Okay, that seems straightforward. Now, apparently you are entitled to your own facts. And
Yeah.
it's very difficult.
And that's the part that worries me too, that, you know, people can take, you know, everybody is like, now everybody hires people to create the narrative, you know, so.
Well, and with technology, what we didn't ever have to worry about. And growing up, when I saw a picture in the newspaper, all of you, it was a real photo. Now you just don't know, was it photoshopped? And now even worse, the deep fake videos. And, you know, that's in the news
Oh, wow.
recently with, you know, so that Vladimir Putin, apparently there was a deep fake video of him recently. So when you can't know that what you see, what you think you're seeing, someone saying something, whether or not that's real, how do we figure out what is good information?
Although, to get back to Pam's point, there was a, you know, part of the information was what you never saw at all, or we didn't choose to cover. Or I remember a photographer who would take John Goodwin and in any picture put him on the side because he cropped him out. So, you know.
Yeah, it's never been perfect.
No, it's
I'm
never
not
been
saying it's ever been perfect, but we
But
have
it is
new challenges. I didn't want to be the only one to have the opportunity to ask questions though today. Does anyone have questions they'd like to ask? And can I borrow a microphone so that you'll be able to hear them?
I just have, I don't know how this fits as far as journalism is concerned, but I'm dismayed at the lack of being very involved with the theater and the arts. What happened to the reviewers? I know that's an opinion, of course, but I do think I know the performers looked at it and looked at their opinions. I think it did something to promote those arts too.
Oh, right.
symbiotic.
So, right. So now we have nothing, you know, and of course it's an opinion. Is that journalism then? Is it an opinion? But I miss the reviews of the arts.
Now, I think that's an important part that you know, of the way the newspaper helped create the community.
used to tell my children, you can't believe everything that, and they're 50 and something, but anyway, you can't believe everything that you see on TV or read in the newspaper. Some of it, you just have to say to yourself, does this really make sense? Today's media, a lot of times reminds me of a book by George Orwell from 1984. Where it was all just made up, there was no war going on. And I'm not saying what's happening in Ukraine is not real, but as this one lady spoke to, do you guys feel that today's journalism, too much emphasis is put on their personal opinion? I just want you to report the news. I don't care whether you like it or not. I just want you to report the truth. So how do you guys feel about either getting the fluffy news? I don't care that Rihanna has a baby bump. I mean, you don't care what I mean. I have one. How do you guys feel about them injecting their personal opinion, trying to sway people when you have a job, and that's just to report the news?
I guess, I think that happens more, as I indicated, on the web, with people who are not working for newspapers, not working for media, but just, set themselves up as some kind of an expert on all of these things. I think the issue is deeper. You look at the Journal Star, it has what, maybe 5 news reporters now, 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And so, put their own opinion in. I don't think they have time to even do that. They barely have time to go out and cover it. What really infuriates me about the Journal Star is all of the restaurant coverage. I don't know how they have time. I don't know who's made that decision that, and I don't know, I have to wonder, I don't know, okay. I have to wonder if there's some return coming to the Journal Star. If somebody goes out and covers the restaurant, does the restaurant pay something? I may be totally off the mark, but I have to wonder why, when there's all these important stories to be covered, and on a recent day, maybe it was yesterday, there were 3, the whole front page, front local was 3 restaurant visits.
But you know what, I think, and yeah, I think this had started before you left, Barb, but when I left, there was a whole big electronic board that would let you know how many people were reading which stories at any given time. And so, whereas people, and that's what I wonder is if the reason we're seeing so many restaurants, for example, are those the stories getting the most hits, so we feature that, or we've all dealt with people, with the public complaining about too much crime. But we always kind of knew intuitively that that's what people read. Well, once they put the leaderboard up, you saw it. So, and so that's what I wondered is what has been driving news coverage too.
I think that's part of it, but the other thing is, if you only have so much time, so many reporters, you do what's easy. Okay, then do what doesn't get you vegetable all the time. So it's like, I can do, okay, here's crime reports, and you grab all these, I can fill that. Here's the weather, nobody's gonna, I always say, because people gripe about negative news, and it's like, here's sports, okay, if you don't like the way the game ended up, don't look at me, man, so, but it's fast and it's easy, and that's what gets covered.
Well, now the deadlines are so early, you can't think. Yeah, what, does anybody know what time the deadlines are now?
Oh, yesterday.
But, we had 10 to 30 deadlines to get the next day news, and now I think it's 4 or 5, if not early.
Well,
So,
some of you guys probably know this, but the Journal Star prints almost every print publication in this immediate area and beyond. Aren't we gonna be doing like the Milwaukee paper or something?
yeah.
So that press, you've only got X amount of time. They can't sit around all day with Peoria News. In fact, I think we're.
Because they're fun.
The press runs 24 hours a day.
Yeah, I think so.
Seriously, that's
Yeah.
what press people have said. Journal Star. We have another question.
So I'm just curious, I graduated from Western with journalism in 1983, and I had no desire to come back to Peoria at all. And I'm just curious, did any of you ever think, I could go to Chicago, there's 2 dailies, I could go to St. Louis, there's 2 dailies, I want to go live in New York and work in the New York Times. Did that ever, I mean, you all stayed here. Which I find really interesting. I'm just curious, did you ever consider any other avenues?
It's another thing, you know, work at the Journal Star, wouldn't realize we are all ESOP babies. Okay, so when the Journal Star became an employee-owned paper, it was very, very, very lucrative to stay here. That's one thing. Now, for me, I moved around a lot as a kid, so I wasn't gonna make my kid move. And I would always, from then to now and beyond, people are people in Peoria, or New York, or San Francisco, or wherever. You can tell a great story wherever you are. So I never thought about leaving that much.
I had an opportunity to go to New York, but I was a single mom of a 4-year-old, and no, I was going to stay here in Peoria. That was more important. When I got out of college, I had opportunities to go elsewhere, but my dad had MS, and I needed to be home and help my mom. So Peoria was a great place for me to be. I'm very happy I never left.
And some of those family and personal related things play into it for me too. But I really like Peoria. You know, I like, and all, because all of my friends were always, you know, when we were younger. You're still there, yeah. No, I like it. I think I like this town.
Does anyone else have anything they wanted to ask? Well, thank you ladies so much. I don't know if we're close to the end, so if anyone wanted to catch them about any of the other interviews, we'd probably do that after. But thank you for coming and talking. I appreciate. I was able to benefit as a woman journalist, where I never felt any discrimination. I didn't feel like my editors said, oh no, you can't cover that, it's too dangerous or anything like that. Then they had no problem sending me to literally a Ku Klux Klan rally by myself. You know, so thank you.
Jenny, when did you come, just relative to, I came in 67.
I didn't start back, well, I was an intern at the Journal Star in the late 80s, like 1989. And then I came back in 1998.
So wow, yeah.
So
And Jenny worked in Springfield.
You know,
I worked in Springfield before I came back here.
I know you're not, I know you're trying to close the door on this and you're
No.
not supposed to open something up. But when you said that, it made me wonder if it, well, I don't know if discrimination is the word I want, but if it wasn't more structural in the sense of, by the time Jenny got here, they weren't, you know, all the guys in the 40s and 50s got to do all the travel and you know, and all of that. And so by the time they started hiring women, all of that was slowly being filtered away, so.
Well, I know when I started, the newsroom was very much a good mix of male, female. Journal Star was never as diverse as it should have been, but I think that's a lot.
But you weren't getting to travel in Vietnam and
no.
all of those things. Oh, that's what I'm saying.
But again, thank you, ladies, and thank you all for coming out. If you're interested in learning more about powerful Peoria women, tomorrow night here in the same space, the Peoria Historical Society will have a program at 6:30, and it is specifically on notable Peoria women then and now. So hopefully you'll join us for that. And if you didn't get a chance, please fill out a survey, send up the event calendar. We have 2 really interesting author events coming up in April. One is Will Haygood. You may be familiar with him. He's a journalist as well. He's written for the Washington Post and Boston Globe, and he's coming to Lincoln Branch to talk about his latest book, which is Colorization: 100 Years of Black Films in a White World. He'll be here April 10th, 2 p.m. We'll be here again, like this was in person, he'll be here in person. And then we have for in April is Autism Month. We also have a couple authors for the book Real coming to speak about that book. And it's on our calendar. So again, thank you very much for all of you. Come on. Ditch that. No.